So the first section is on steel rule dies, and they typically come in 4 sizes. This one is extra large bigs, this one is large bigs, this one is just bigs, and I'm gonna guess they probably call this one small bigs. Not very often that you see these anymore. These I bought many, many years ago and just happened to have. So for today, I'm gonna show you cutting on these 3 sizes. Now, the nice thing about these steel rule dies is they have a thick base, they have some foam, and in between those foam, there's actually blades. So if you pressed hard enough, you probably could cut your finger. I'm pressing fairly hard and I'm not cutting my finger, but they've actually got blades in them. And because of that, you can cut cardstock, you can cut chipboard, you can cut fabric, you can cut foil, you can cut all sorts of different substrates that you can't do with the wafer thin dies. You can only do it with the bigs dies. So they do have their place. It's not as common for dies to come out in this format anymore. Most of the dies come out in wafer thin dies now. But the ones that you can find that are this size are great because they can cut more, a wider variety of materials. So the first bigs die that we're going to cut is this particular one here that makes this really cute curio box. So with the bigs dies, you don't need to use this multi-purpose platform. Because they're so thick, you only need to use your 2 cutting plates. So I am going to put 1 cutting plate below, and then I'm going to put my paper that I happen to already have cut to size on top, and you can see exactly where the blades are, so it's very easy to know that you're completely covering where the blades lie, and then you're putting your other cutting plate over top. So I'm going to put it into the machine, and I'm going to simply turn the handle to run it all the way through. And you can see this particular plate I've used many, many times, and it's gotten well cut into, but it actually hasn't started warping yet. I just keep making sure that I use the different sides when I go through. So it is cut fully through these pieces of cardstock. And what this particular one creates, once it's all put together, is this cute little box. This particular box I sprayed with some sprays to get it colored. And then from there, you can use some different dies to create a different little vignette box there. So that is cutting with cardstock. So the next one that I'm going to cut is this particular little tag die. Now this die is a movers and shapers die, which they don't really make these nearly as much anymore, but I wanted to cover so that if you came across them and wanted to use them, you would know how. So these particular open spaces are intended, you can either cut the die as it is, or you can place one of these movers and shapers pieces in there, and it's going to end up cutting the whatever die you choose out within that tag. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to cut one in chipboard without the movers and shapers in there. These come with these little squares. Do not throw them away. The biggest mistake some people make is throwing them away. What they do is once you've put your die through the machine with your substrate, it helps to push that out so that you're not having to poke it out with a piercer. So I'm going to put that on my clear plate. I'm going to put some chipboard over top of it, and then I'm going to put my other clear plate over top, and I'm going to run that through the machine as well. Now you'll see me running it all the way through the machine this way most of the time. You can put it through the other way. The machine goes both ways. There's not one way to do it. That's just the most comfortable way for me. So this piece here can get tossed out because I don't need it. And because I have those little pieces of foam in there, this just pops right out. And they have magnets on them so they don't move. Wherever you put them, they stay. So now I have my little chipboard piece. You can actually use cereal box, anything that's thick, this will cut. Now let's cut that same die with some cardstock, but we'll put one of the movers and shapers pieces in there. So I'm going to put my cardstock right over the die, I'm going to flip my plate around so that it cuts on the other side, and I'm going to roll it through. And see it cut the whole tag with the word dream out of it. If by chance you have a piece of cardstock left in a bit there, you can use a little piercing tool, and I just put it in on an angle and it helps to poke that little bit out there. This second piece here is the chipboard, so it's a little bit thicker and I have to work a little bit harder, but it does come right out of there. Now these movers and shapers pieces are a different thickness from the Biggs dies, so you can't just use the 2 cutting plates and run this through. It won't be thick enough. When movers and shapers first came out, there was a base tray that you would use. It's magnetic, so you can store your dies in here, and that's typically what I do with mine. You can now buy just a movers and shapers base plate that you can use so that you have the right thickness through your machine. To use your machine with just the movers and shapers dies, you're going to have your clear plate, you're going to have either the base tray or the movers and shapers plate. You're going to put your paper over your dies. If you wanted them the same color, you could just put the dies closer and have just one sheet of paper. I just wanted them a little bit different colored from each other. And you just run that through and it cuts those dies for you. And then with all those pieces that I just cut, I ended up making this little tag here with some ink and some sprays. Some of the Biggs dies you'll find are like this. And when you go look at the die, there's all sorts of different pieces that you're going to end up putting together to create this look. Now they made this die, this particular shape die this way so that you could use chipboard, you could use grunge board, all sorts of different things to give those suitcases some texture and depth. But we're going to just use it with cardstock. So when you have a die here that has all sorts of different little pieces that you don't necessarily want all in the same color, what you can do, if you decide you want to make a ton of them, you can put different colors sheets of paper and then cut out a whole bunch at one time and then assemble them. But if you only want to pull it through once, what you can do is cut your pieces of cardstock just to fit over where the blades are and then just lay them on top. This particular one will go either way through the machine, it doesn't really matter. You're going to put your plate on top and then you're gonna roll it through. And it's gonna cut those individual pieces for you. This one here, you might see the edge of the cardstock, but the other side of it is completely solid, so I'm not actually using that on what I'm creating there. All the extra outside bits can get tossed away and then you can put your suitcases together. And when that is done, I actually ended up putting mine on the chipboard tag that was cut. Used a little bit of paint, a little bit of ink, and just created a solid tag. So lastly, I know I said you can cut foil and acetate and fabric and all sorts of things with the Biggs dies, but I just wanted to show you how it was done. This just happens to be a piece of denim from an old pair of jeans. You're going to put the die or the fabric right on top of the die. You've got your clear plate below there. You're going to put it on that. And actually that piece of denim is a little bit too wide. You want to make sure that it's just a little bit narrower than your cutting plate. So I'm just going to cut that a little bit narrower. And then I'm going to put my plate over top and I'm going to roll it through. And there you go. Now there was a couple places there that it didn't totally cut through. If you find that happens with your machine, what you can do is take a piece of cardstock, put it below the die, and that will thicken your sandwich up a little bit and give it a little bit more pressure. If you find that's not enough, do 2 pieces of cardstock. The reason I like to use cardstock is because it has a little bit of give to it, so you're not going to harm your machine. It's just going to put a little bit more pressure and just make your sandwich a little bit thicker. But this one here, I mean, there's a couple places where it didn't really cut, but it does tend to come out. So that there is my little denim flower. And you can use cotton fabric. Again, you can use acetate. You can use all sorts of different fabrics for it. Some people like to use felt and then create felt flowers with them. Whatever you want. And it doesn't necessarily have to be flowers. I just happen to keep saying flowers because that's the dye that I'm using. So there you go. Flower cut with a Biggs die.